Oppos actually sent this out. Topping had nothing to do with this review, and all thoughts and opinions, like always, are my own. Hey, what's up? I'm Josh. The too long didn't watch of this video is very simple. This is one of the best all-in-ones in the market. The spec performance out of this is just ridiculous. We'll get into that. The sound quality is awesome, being a discrete NFC amp. And just the capability of this device in general for the value is actually not really matchable by any other product that I'm aware of. Now, it's important to know that I'm talking about all-in-ones here. This as an all-in-one is entering endgame setup for me, where performance like this was only really capable from separates until this amp came out. And we'll talk about all that in a little bit. Now, one of the easiest ways to understand how big of a bump this is in performance compared to previous generation is to compare it to the previous generation. So Topping's old flagship all-in-one was the DX7 Pro Plus, and this is the DX9. The DX7 Pro Plus had a 27 volt peak to peak and a total wattage output of about 2 watts, actually just under 2 watts. This has a 47 volt peak to peak and a total wattage output into 16 ohms of 10 watts, which is absolutely wild. This is all while maintaining basically the same total harmonic distortion figures of 0.00007%, which is just ridiculous. It also raises the dynamic range to 132 dB. It does this all while reducing channel crosstalk, having an inbuilt power supply, which is not something every brand can seemingly do, and in my opinion, being the best looking product in Topping's current lineup. It's in this really nice looking chassis with this glass display. This is the 15th anniversary silver edition. It's a pretty good looking product. When it comes to sound performance, I also think that this is a bit of a step up because this embraces discrete NFCA technology, which a lot of people are preferring, including myself, the discrete version of NFCA versus the non-discrete version. So things like the A90 and going to the A90D, the A90D saw a better bump in sound quality, and this is no exception to that. Now, I think for specs alone, being as ridiculous and preposterous as this is for specs, and really being kind of a data sheet princess for the most part, these specs aren't really attainable by any other brand right now for an all-in-one. They might hit somewhere where they have like close to the same power output or close to the same total harmonic distortion figures, but nothing really has everything that this has. And surprisingly, another win for this is actually the feature set. This has an abundance of features. It has pre-outs, it has line outs, it's got a ton of different inputs, including doubling up on some inputs like coax and optical. It actually has 2 of each, which is really cool. It's got these dual screens, which you can change the display to be either your information for your input settings and your volume, or you can change it to FFT or a VU meter. This also has a state-of-the-art kind of flagship AK4499 EQ DAC chip inside, which is a 32-bit DAC, but it's a pretty good one. It's not the best you can get for DACs, but as far as an all-in-one goes, this is actually a pretty competent little DAC. And inside this is actually a 6-channel discrete NFCA amp. So NFCA stands for Nested Feedback Composite Amplifier. They're known for being incredibly low distortion, and the previous ones that weren't discrete have a bit of a kind of a known history for being a bit sharp to people's ears. They seem a bit etched out, and some people consider them artificial. One of the big gains in the discrete version of the NFCA amps is that typically people are not reporting the same problem, and I don't hear the same problem either, and we'll get into all that in a second. Another cool thing here is that this actually has a hybrid relay volume control, and you can actually hear it clicking. This has quite a few options in terms of what you can do with the inputs and the outputs. You can select what outputs you want to use, what outputs you don't want to use, how you want them to act and operate, and you can control all that through the screens. This also has quite a few filter settings, including 6 PCM settings and 2 different DSD settings. Now, there is no EQ on this, and that is one of the only major downsides. Is as capable as this device is, one of the only improvements that I could suggest making is different EQ profiles for different sound. Now, it's arguable that the filters can affect this somewhat, but it's nowhere near as broad or capable as an EQ adjustment can be. So I would have loved to see that. Can't do it, unfortunately, but yeah, next generation, I would hope to see some EQ settings. I think at this point, a lot of amplifiers are performing so well for specifications that one of the big difference makers in the future is going to be amps with EQ settings and amps without. Now, can you make a better audio system than this? Of course. Will you make it for the same price? that's debatable. For example, the A90D and the D93 come in at $1,500. Now, in my opinion, that's going to be a little bit better system, but it's not an all-in-one. And I think that for some people, they're looking for exactly an all-in-one. So there's a big advantage to being one singular device. It's a bit more minimal. This still sounds very good and gets extremely close to the performance of the A90D already. And so unless you just want separates, I think this does a good enough job at sounding as close to that as it really can. Now, I say this knowing that the D93 will definitely be a preference of some people because of its architecture for its DAC, but personal preferences aside, as far as general capability, this is very impressive. Now, as far as I'm aware, and if you are aware of something that does compete with this, please let me know. But I'm not aware of another all-in-one that will perform objectively as well as this. There's absolutely room for subjectivity here though. For example, this is the Niche Pietus Maximus. It's kind of built off of a shit chassis, but it's not a shit product. And this has a completely different tone and a completely different flavor, but doesn't measure as well. So if you prefer something that's a bit more pure sounding, something like the DX9 is going to be your cup of tea. If you want something that is a bit more flavored, a bit warmer, and has some really, really awesome characteristics on its own, and something that kind of implements its sound signature to what you actually hear, an amplifier like this could totally be higher up in your subjectivity list than a kind of more invisible amplifier, let's say, like the DX9. Okay, so this measures really well. At this point, if you know topping, that's definitely not a surprise. Let's talk about sound quality. We already talked about the discrete amp being a changing factor for sound quality, and that's definitely a thing. If you were used to a lower end NFCA amp or a kind of like an older topping amp, you might be used to a bit sharper or a bit more sterile of a sound signature that is a bit more, some people call it etched in the top end, maybe even a little bit dry in the lower end. And this is really not like that. It's not overly warm, but the best way I can describe the sound signature is to tell you that it's very hard to actually describe the sound signature. This is one of those amps that feels kind of invisible to the ear. You don't really feel like the actual amplifier is influencing the headphones, if that makes any sense. This kind of just runs the headphones, and whatever the headphone properties are, this will display. So in a weird way, it is sort of hard to describe the sound signature because there is very little influence to your ears. That's not to say that it's impossible, but it is a bit more difficult. So a couple easy things right off the bat that you can expect. There is no noise floor, to the point where it's not even worth mentioning or bringing up in conversation. You can plug in the most efficient IEMs on high gain, and at 16 ohms, it's putting out 10 watts to those headphones, and you will not hear a peep. You won't hear anything at all. So it's super quiet for noise floor. On the polar opposite end, you could talk about some of the most demanding headphones in the industry, things like the Modhouse Tungsten or the Susvara Unveiled. And this has enough power to actually run those. Now, is this the best possible amp setup that you could use with it? No, but it is able to run them sufficiently for volume to be quite satisfying. So it's even got a bit of headroom with the Susvara Unveiled, which is kind of crazy for an all-in-one. It's just really good performance for its power capability and its background noise potential. One of the things that the A90D does have a little bit over this is its dynamic range potential. I think it's 147 dB and this is like 132. So I do think that the A90D paired with a really good DAC is going to be a bit better for sound performance, but really not by much. This still has a very clean and pure signal, and the dynamics are still really excellent. 132 dB for an all-in-one is awesome. So some things that you should not expect with this. This will not be a warm sounding amplifier. It will not be a cold sounding amplifier or a bright sounding amplifier. It's not going to do anything weird with the vocals. It's not going to have any weird or odd characteristics that you might even be looking for. Like if you're looking for a bit more of a tubey sound, obviously a solid state amplifier like this is probably not what you're looking for, but it isn't like something like this Niche where it's just obviously tailored to sound a certain way. This is kind of tailored to not sound like anything at all. It's an odd way to describe it, but I feel like it's kind of true. When you listen to this, you don't really feel like it's adding anything, and you also don't feel like it's taking anything away. It just kind of feels like it's giving you this perfect, super honest delivery of what music can be. And for some people, they might be looking for something that is a bit more enhanced, and I think that's completely fair. I look for that sometimes too. But I also think that this type of dead neutral performance is very desirable. And to compare this to something like the previous A90s, non-discrete amps are a bit kind of thinner sounding. They don't have as much mid-range. They don't have as much bass dynamics. They have a similar top end, but without, they have that etching kind of weird sharpening sound on the very top end, which used to be kind of state-of-the-art sound. Like it used to be one of the best top end deliveries you could get, because in the price bracket that a lot of these NFCA amps were coming in at, top end that clean just wasn't quite possible until you went way up in price. And now that way up in price performance, that, you know, expensive end game performance is coming down in price to right now about $1,300 for this. So this cleans up a lot of the edges that people used to complain about. And the discrete version of all these amps is doing a really, really good job of that. Even my buddy who has a YouTube channel, Tyler's Eclectic, is kind of known for being a bit of a topping hater, but he actually likes a lot of what topping is doing currently with the AK chips for the DACs and the discrete versions of a lot of these amplifiers. So I think that even he would quite enjoy the performance of this amplifier. Okay, so another comparison to my previous main DAC and amp, the Aune S9C. The S9C is a great amplifier, and in a lot of ways it sounds very similar to As Good As This does, but this just has a bit more headroom. It's got a fair bit more power than that amplifier, and in my opinion, better looks. So this is just a better amplifier, but it also costs a bit more than that one does. That one's still a great option if you're budget limited, but if you're looking for basically the state of the art right now for an all-in-one, this is essentially it. Now I do have a couple options for you. If you don't want to spend this much and you're looking to spend about $500 and still get a really clean, simple, minimalist all-in-one, the JDS Labs Element 4 is a really good option. This has way less features in terms of inputs and outputs, and it doesn't have balance capability, but it has a really nice build, and it comes with an online EQ tool where you can actually load a custom EQ profile physically onto the device. If you take it anywhere, the EQ profile goes with it. I also think that depending on your preferences, something like this $180 niche amplifier, this Piety, actually could be a better amp for you than this $1,300 DAC and amplifier, because this is just more flavored in a particular direction. So if you have a preference towards a much warmer sound, something like this is gonna save you a lot of money. You have to aim towards the right products to get the best version of sound for you. And this has its audience for sure. I'm a big fan of this, especially for reviewing. I feel like it really doesn't influence what I'm listening to, so I can judge this piece of hardware, for example, independently. And I can hook the DAC outputs up to this and judge this independently, and then reference kind of a flat playing field. But not everybody is into that, and that's perfectly okay. Currently, this is the best that topping can do, and I think that is plenty well enough. This is absolutely among the state of the art right now for all-in-ones. Truly, by my definition of endgame, I think this is starting to look very competitive with even separates, just because we're getting to this level where you might have slightly more power or slightly better specs, but at what point does that matter, right? I'm not using the last half of what this is capable of for most headphones. So even if another amplifier comes out and it's at 20 watts versus the 10 that this has, I'm kind of left with the feeling of like, so what? I don't need the extra wattage. And I think for some, it's been like that for a while, depending on what headphones you have. But for me, since I have to have as wide a ranging amplifier as I can, something that can run everything from ultra efficient IEMs to the ultra inefficient planar headphones, something like this makes a lot of sense for my particular use case, but might be very different for yours. All right, that's going to be it. Thank you, Opus, for sending this out. Thank you for watching. You can find affiliated links down below. You don't have to use those if you don't want to, but I do earn a small commission if you do want to buy this. And as always, do your own research, etc., etc. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.